Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, an exploration of the Hamilton College experience. Welcome back to another one. This is going to be a fun one again. And if you're just joining us for the first time, hello, welcome. Sit down, join us. This one's going to be a fun conversation. But you know what? The other ones were good too. Last week's show spent a lot of time talking about the city of Los Angeles with its Chief Innovation Officer, Amanda Daflos. And this week we stay out in LA, but we shift focus to a different part of town, Hollywood. We're going to talk to Dave Bugliari, class of 2001. Dave is one of the top agents at CAA. And last week we talked to Amanda about the effects COVID-19 is having on Los Angeles. So I was interested to talk to Dave about what impact it's having on Hollywood. Hey, if you are one of those new listeners, check us out on social media, Had I Known Show. That's Had I Known Show across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Let us know what you think of the show and who you want us to talk to next. I've been hearing from a lot of people asking to get on their favorite professor. It's one of the great things about Hamilton is the relationships its students develop with its professors and maintain those relationships even beyond graduation. And that's coming through in the requests that we're getting for who to talk to next. So stay tuned, and we're going to try and make that happen. I've really enjoyed my conversations with Professor Mark Cryer and Doc Woods. Those were a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And if you haven't heard any of those conversations, you can find them anywhere you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, you name it. Anywhere you can find a podcast, search for Had I Known and we'll be there. Or to make it easy on you, just go to hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. Again, hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. You can access all episodes there, and where later today you can find this episode. And speaking of Buzzsprout, if you've been thinking about starting your own podcast, let me tell you that Buzzsprout is the place to go. I used it to get this show off the ground, and it was simple. They got me listed on every major podcast platform, created a website. They give analytics tools so I can understand who's listening and how many are listening. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and I'm telling you now, the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you get started. So join over 100,000 podcasters like me and follow the link in the show notes. So if you go down in the show notes, you see there's a link there for Buzzsprout. Click that, sign up, get your podcast started. Doing so will get you set up with all the tools you need, and Buzzsprout's going to give you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up. Following that link lets them know we sent you and help support this show. Podcasting's never been easier with Buzzsprout. All right, let's get into this week's show. So Dave Bugliari, this one's a fun one for me personally. I've mentioned on the show before that I was an RA. I was an RA my junior year in Dunham. And one of my first-year advisees was a guy named Dave Bugliari. So if you fast forward many years, it really blew my mind when I picked up People magazine one day and saw Dave Bugliari on the cover of People magazine, marrying Alyssa Milano. Someone on Instagram, I think it was, wrote a note when we were promoting this show. Wait, a Hamilton grad is married to Alyssa Milano? Yes, a Hamilton grad is married to Alyssa Milano. And, by the way, is one of the top agents at CAA. This was an interesting conversation with Dave where we get into how he got his start as an agent, how the Hamilton experience informed his ability to do that job, and what it's like being married to Alyssa Milano and having to deal with paparazzi and trying to stay private through all that craziness. He's a great guy. It was a good conversation. And if you're a current student, there are some words of wisdom in here about getting started in your career. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here's Dave Bugliari, class of 2001.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Surviving.
I'm right there along with you. Every day feels like a little bit of like some kind of weird joke.
I know
that people are playing on us, but
the line I use with everybody is, there are days when I am immensely grateful for the extra time I get to spend with my family, and then there are days when the screams inside my head are deafening.
Exactly. Exactly. It is really bananas. It's also just like, it's bananas just watching as people don't seem to be getting the message, right?
Right.
It's like,
Right.
I was on a walk with my wife today. We were just talking about like, it's actually, they're like, everyone's just freaking out. They're like, what do we do? It's like, well, here's what you do. You stay away from people.
Right.
You actually like listen to, I don't know, any of the warnings or guidelines that people have given. But instead, there's people just fully partying.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, at least.
And I'm just roasting potatoes. But if you hear noise in the background, that's what I'm doing. I'm roasting potatoes.
All right. Well, that's good. I hope they're good. You got to feed your family.
Exactly.
Are we? Am I going to get to go to the movies or at least see new movies anytime soon? What's this doing to you?
I think you're going to see new movies, but I don't think you will. I don't think you'll be going to the movies anytime soon.
Certainly not. Certainly not. But things are going to be produced.
Yes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
So
yeah, where they're at least making an effort to make things right now.
Well, that's good.
And hopefully, like, for example, I have a client who just went back and is in quarantine, I guess, on to start making the Matrix again. And then I know that a bunch of different things are in sort of the on the taxiing on the runway, getting ready to take off, like the Jurassic Park, I think, Matrix, the Batman movies are starting to, I think the actors are in quarantine right now. So I think things are starting to, with a lot of restrictions and guidelines, are starting to get, somewhat back up to speed, but we'll see.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
I feel like you don't hear a lot about what Hollywood's doing to get production started.
Yeah, there's new guidelines and restrictions sent out every week or so. Whether it's they've gone from everything from talking about completely quarantining cast and stuff like that. There's all sorts of different things that some you can pull off and some you really can't.
So you're keeping busy then. Your work hasn't. I'm sure everyone's work's been impacted, but it sounds like I would imagine if things are cooking up, then you're keeping busy.
Yeah, I use the analogy that it's like assembling Legos on a raft that's slowly floating down the river. Because you just, everyone was like, yeah, we'll be back up in July. And it's like, well, we meant August. And then it's like, We'll most likely we won't start until September.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, what's fascinating to me is you're married to someone who is constantly in the public light. Try to search for anything public on you and you don't find very much. That must be hard for you to stay private, because it seems like, based on what little you can find online, other than like the occasional awkward paparazzi shot, there isn't a whole lot written up about you, or you're not doing a lot of press.
I try really hard. I don't think that my clients want to hear it. I think they're the ones that are in the press, and it's interesting because people do call and they ask for interviews, and I try very hard. This will be one of the rare occasions ever.
Well, I am honored.
But I just think it's easier, dealing with the clients that I deal with, and you never want to be in the spotlight or you want to be behind the scenes, and working to promote their spotlight more than my own. So I'm glad that you couldn't find much on me.
You're doing a good job.
Occasionally, being married to who I'm married to, it does make it hard, if you're at an event with her, to not, they're like, take a picture with her, and it's hard to be like, no, But sometimes we say no, but every once in a while, it's nice to be able to be a husband and not an agent for a second.
Yeah. A lot of times, I imagine you're at LAX or you're walking down the street and they're just shoving a camera in your face.
Yeah, that is no fun. And that is something I never, ever will get used to, whether it's with my wife or with a client. I constantly forget, I think partly because you're kind of disoriented when you get off a plane anyway, and you're walking down to baggage claim, and then all of a sudden you just get bombarded. And Alyssa is great. It does not affect her at all, and she'll stop and she signs for all these people and she talks to them, and they've all got a story of, how they watched her on Who's the Boss. I mean, it's crazy. And I'm like, we got to go get our bags. But she's a pro. She's been doing it since she was 8 years old. Yeah. But I forget, and I forget, I'm like, oh yeah. A, there's people who make their living doing that, and B, right. there's rabid fans who will find out that she's coming in from a flight from New York, and they'll wait at the airport to take a picture with her.
I tell you, when I lived in LA, and I traveled a lot in the time I lived there, every flight you step off of at LAX, you see them standing there, right? And the cameras I get, okay, they're trying to snap a picture with a TMZ sort of piece, but it's the professional autograph people who stand there with books of pictures, and I'm like, you're not that big of a fan. And that just feels like another level of just, what are you doing? There's people coming off with their kids from vacation, and you're shoving this stuff in their face.
That part, that definitely changed the dynamic when all of a sudden we had kids. Or I remember when Alyssa was pregnant, I drove her to a pregnant yoga, and she was 8 months pregnant or something like that, and a paparazzi got into her face and almost hit her with the camera, and that was not okay.
Yeah. But then I imagine you have to. I mean, there's the Dave from New Jersey husband reaction, and then there's the, oh no, wait, this guy's got a camera, and if I react, then I become the story, especially given your job. I can't imagine that conflict, that internal conflict.
I reacted that time. That was not a good one for me. I reacted. I probably overreacted a little bit, and I kind of park benched him over a hedge. And then I got in my car and I was kind of shaking, thinking to myself, oh man, this is I know how bad this was. And I called the sort of head of communications at CAA, and I said, this just happened. And he was like, well, is he okay? And I said, yeah, he's fine. He kind of swore at me, and he's like, well, if he's got it on camera, you're in a bit of trouble. Yeah. And I got out of the car and I apologized to the guy, and he kept mouthing off at me. And I was like, dude, my wife was pregnant, and you basically, blocked her path to where she was going. And, your lens was about an inch from her face, and I reacted. I'm sorry. And then, he got in his car and sped off, and I was like, I'm going to get sued. And then I just never heard from him. So he either didn't have it on camera or accepted my apology. Wasn't my finest moment, Dave.
Well, I mean, I get it. At some point there's a natural human reaction. That's the sad part, right? Is you feel like sometimes that these guys are searching for that reaction.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, that's hard. Well, let's bring it back to Hamilton. So this is, that a big part of this is about the Hamilton experience. So, how did you end up at Hamilton?
I was pretty dead set that I was going to go to Colgate, actually. And it had a recruiting visit there for soccer. Stayed over with a bunch of guys on the soccer team. I knew a bunch of guys who went there who had gone to my high school in New Jersey. And I was all but in my mind, I was buying the Colgate sweatshirt. And my brother actually had said to me, you should really check out Hamilton. You're going to be so close. You should go do a visit, go take an interview. And I did. And I stayed there with a soccer player, Pete Bugliari, he had a room on the dark side. And I remember thinking the dorm I stayed in at Colgate was much nicer than this. So I was like, I'm definitely going to Colgate still. And then I sat with a bunch of the guys on the soccer team and just had an incredible experience, and started asking smart questions of do you like the school? What don't you like about the school? That kind of thing. And then I just in the afternoon, I had an hour or two free, and I just kind of walked around the quad on the non-dark side. I guess it was called the light side. I don't remember. But I walked around the quad and I talked to different students and stuff like that. And I remember just thinking like, wow, all these people seem so nice, and they all are so generous with their time and answering questions. And I was like, I think I want to go to Hamilton. And that was it. It like that. It changed my mind. And I loved the idea that I could play both soccer and lacrosse there. So then I just needed to figure out how to get in. So I begged my way in with the admissions people and said, I know my grades aren't good enough, but I promise I'll make you proud.
And do you think you fulfilled on that promise?
I'm getting there.
This helps. Being a part of the college radio station, now helps.
Yeah, well, that's why I was doing this. Will this not do that for me?
I'll put in a good word.
Thank you.
So you get up on the campus. At what point did you realize you had lucked into the greatest RA any student could ever have?
Well, I think that was before school even started, because we had to get up there early for soccer. And I got there, and I was in Dunham on the second floor, and Dunham was. I remember telling someone that I was in Dunham, and they were like, "Oh, that place is a dump," and I was like, "Oh, great." And then I met you, and you said, "I'm your RA," and I said, "I don't even know what that means." And you said, "Basically, I'm going to keep you from destroying this dorm."
My sole motivation was, I'm going to keep you doing something stupid that gets me in trouble.
That's right, and you did. You were very good at it. And you let us borrow your car.
That's right.
But I think you came down the hall a couple times and asked us to keep the noise down, but that was about it.
All right.
I was so busy playing sports, I didn't have too much time to get in trouble.
Some of the other folks on your hall, on the other hand.
Yes. The hallway, I can't speak for.
So, two-sport athlete, what was that like?
It was very busy. Very time consuming, but I think all joking aside about the trouble stuff, I think playing sports for me, if I was bored, that's when I was going to find my way, to something that would keep me not bored. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think the sports really helped with that. Mm-hmm. 'Cause there's certainly enough trouble to get yourself into in college if you're not, consumed with some sort of, athletic endeavor.
Right.
And I just loved it. I mean, I loved the sport mindset is sort of what drives me in my job now too. Just being competitive and wanting to win.
Mm-hmm. And you, if I remember correctly, you're doing something sports related right out of college, weren't you?
Right out of college, my buddy and I were going to go play. We had been invited to try out to go play soccer in New Zealand. Huh. And we were supposed to leave in September of 2001, right around September 11th. Oh. And when that happened, that kind of changed all of our plans. And I was in Lake Tahoe at the time where we had come out to do like high altitude training and, just get like our body fat down and all that nonsense. It was just a good excuse to be in Lake Tahoe. And then that turned into, when 9/11 happened, that turned into staying in Tahoe and becoming a carpenter, a chef, a ski bum, a bouncer, every odd job I could find in order to just have enough money to ski and eat.
Life lessons.
Exactly.
And then how does that turn into Dave Bugliari, big-time Hollywood agent?
So I didn't know what I wanted to do for a living. I couldn't figure it out, but I kind of ruled a couple things out. I have one brother who is a writer, and I have one brother who is works in finance, and at the time was at Lehman Brothers. And I went and visited him at work and sat with him on his trading floor and kind of just observed and just realized like, oh my gosh, I am out of my league here. These people are way smarter than I could ever hope to be. And I don't understand what they're talking about. I knew, and most of my friends from Hamilton, as I'm sure a lot of yours did too, most of my friends from Hamilton went on to do something in finance.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt like that's probably what I'm supposed to be doing. Right. And it just didn't match with me.
That was such a disheartening thing to deal with, especially I remember when I was a junior, senior, and all these people were recruited on campus and had jobs locked up before they'd even graduated.
I had buddies with signing bonuses with money where I was like, oh my God, I'm like, you never have to work again. Right. With that signing bonus alone, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. I was excited for them, but I was like, what am I doing wrong that I don't even know what I want to do.
Right. Exactly.
So that was, I remember that being a very scary thing for me. And luckily, again, I think my brother and my parents were just like, you don't need to know yet. Like, relax. You're going to be fine. And of course, I also had this one great call what I had with my mom where I ascended up the ranks at one of the bars I worked at in Tahoe. And they asked me if I wanted to be the manager. And the place was called the Naughty Dog. And I remember calling my mom and saying, I have great news. I've been asked to be the manager at the Naughty Dog. And my mom was like, permanently? And I was like, yeah, isn't this great news? Like, I can live in Tahoe forever. And my mom was like, that is great. And I think it's something you can always go back and do if that is your passion. But I don't know that being the manager of a bar is necessarily your passion. And I was like, you don't know what you're talking about, Mom. Cut to the Naughty Dog closed pretty quickly after I had left. But anyway, going back to me trying to figure out what it is I did want to do.
Wait. Did they close because you left?
No. I think it didn't maybe have in my mind, it was like the greatest bar, the most populated bar in the history of all bars, and was just going to make me very rich beyond my wildest dreams.
Sure.
And I think that just wasn't the case in a seasonal town. My mom had the right idea. But then I thought, all right, I like the idea of being a lawyer. Maybe I'll be a lawyer. So I started I was applying to law school and stuff like that. And I started meeting with different lawyers and asking them about their jobs. And they would always start with sort of like, so why do you want to be a lawyer? I was like, well, I'm not sure I want to be a lawyer, but I'm definitely interested in it. And they're like, hold on, you're not going to law school if you're not sure you want to be a lawyer. Like, are you out of your mind? And a lot of them didn't seem like they completely loved their job. Some of them did, but a lot of them were like, if you don't absolutely love this and you're not 100% sure this is what you want to do, then go no further. Like, make sure you know. Because I just thought, like, wouldn't it be cool to have a law degree? And then people were like, no, it's not cool unless you're a lawyer. So I was learning a lot along the way from people just being like, no, you idiot. Don't just go get a law degree if you don't definitely want to be a lawyer. And then I kind of was looking into the sports world and sports agenting and stuff like that. And then while I was down visiting my other brother in Los Angeles, he had just successfully sold a spec script, which I had no idea what a spec script was. But I said, what does that mean? And he said, these people are paying me this much money for the script I wrote. And my reaction was like, you never need to work again. And I said, how does that work? And he kind of runs me through it and says, my agent calls and does this and blah, blah. And I was like, wait a second, tell me more about this agent guy. And then he said, why don't you go meet him? I went and had an informational interview with his agent at the time. And I always tell people when they ask me about this story, for me, it was sort of that Peanuts, the Charlie Brown moment where like the teacher's voice starts going. Like, I walked into the lobby of this agency and I was already in my mind, similar to like my college thing, when I was like, oh, I'm going to work here. And I was just in the lobby at that point. And as his agent started describing what it is he does and how his job works and stuff like that, I was about 4 minutes into it. It was just like, wah, 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 wah. And I was like measuring the drapes already. I was like, this is where I'm going to work. And when he finished, I was like, okay, how do I work here? And he was like, I don't know. You got to talk to HR and blah, blah, blah. And then
And what was it? Was it just the idea of Hollywood, or what drew you in?
I grew up loving television and movies. I always, some of my fondest memories are sitting on the couch watching movies that I never would have watched had it not been for my dad was just like, no, this is a classic. You have to watch it. And I would watch it, sort of begrudgingly be watching, Shane or something like that. And then like 15 minutes in, I'd be like, oh, this is pretty cool. Or, some Clint Eastwood movie, or, even my dad loved the old, like the Thin Man and the James Bond and the Charlie Chan things, like all these movies that I never would have watched. But not for him watching them, on repeat and loving them. And I remember just loving movies, and I love television. And as this guy kind of described, like they were the brokers in between something being an idea and becoming film or television. I was like, I'm in. This is what I want to do. And so I started reading everything. One of the things that Hamilton made me really good at was research. And this was, before you could just go Google stuff. This was, you had to go to libraries, or you had to, pull actual, Dave, do you remember these things called newspapers that were like actual physical papers?
Those artifacts, yes.
Yeah. So I read every single thing one could read about agencies in general. At the time, it was UTA, which is United Talent Agency, WMA, which is William Morris Agency, which is one of the oldest agencies ever, which then merged with Endeavor, which to become WME, ICM, and Creative Artists Agency, which is where I work. And I met and interviewed at all of them, except I couldn't get a call back from CAA. And that drove me nuts. And similar to me begging my way into Hamilton, I was like, I'm not going to take a no call back as an answer. So I befriended this guy by the name of Sam Wolfson, who he was the assistant to the head of HR. And I called him every day and kept asking to get a time to speak with the head of HR, this woman by the name of Arlene Newman, who was an institution herself. She had been there for 17 years and she had hired everyone, and she was, stone cold, and just like when you got in there, she convinced you why you didn't want this job. And I finally got her on the phone one day. One day she picked up and I said, I just want to come in and sit with you for a second. And I was like, and then you can send me away and I'll never bug you again. And she said, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow at 10 a.m. And I was in Tahoe, which is about a 7-hour drive. And I was like, okay. And I went and tried to figure out how to iron my suit, which was like, probably the same suit I wore for my confirmation. And I drove down to Los Angeles and met with her. But so I walk into the lobby of CAA, and this is an old building. It was at 9830 Wilshire Boulevard, and it was an IM Pay building. So you walk in, it's this big cavernous lobby. There's a desk where a person's, like a reception desk where you sat, where a person sat, and then couches. And I went in, I checked in, I went and sat down on the couches, and I was shaking. The cavernous lobby had its effect on me, where I was like, I was intimidated. And sitting there filling out a form that they gave me to fill out, some kind of application or whatever, I feel the presence of a person come in and sit down next to me, and I kind of don't even really glance up. I just filling out my thing, trying not to have bad handwriting, and sit up straight. And I, in my mind, I was like, everything's a test. They're watching me. Everything's a test. And the person sitting next to me, I kind of picked my head up and I just said hello, and they said hello back. And as I sort of glanced again, I recognized that it was Natalie Portman, and she was sitting on the same couch as me in Los Angeles at the Creative Artist Agency. And I was like, well, this is a win. I was like, Natalie Portman just said hello to me. Like, I can go home right now. It's all good. And
you weren't like, oh, are you applying to be an agent too?
Almost. I was lucky I could get any words out at all. But she said, what are you writing? And I said, oh, it's a application. I'm here to apply for a job today. And she was like, oh, cool. And I said, what are you doing? And she was like, oh, I'm seeing my agent. And I was like, oh. And then I realized I had nothing else to say to Natalie Portman. I was like, I think I probably said something like, cool. And then went back to, now even more nervous writing my application. And Natalie got up. She went and used the restroom. She came back. She was like, you're still here. And I said, yeah, I know. I guess they're making me wait for a second. She goes, if you get a job here, you should tell them that someone is throwing, when people would take a paper towel and they'd open the door with the paper towel, but if there wasn't a trash can, they just left the paper towel on the floor.
Yeah.
She told me that someone had done that or multiple people had done that. And she was like, you should tell them that there's paper towels on the floor in the women's bathroom. And I was like, I will, Natalie Portman. I will do that. So then she went to her meeting. I sat there a little longer. I went downstairs, with the basement, which is where HR was. And I sat with Arlene, who, as advertised, began telling me why I didn't want this job and why it was so hard and all the different things. And I kept saying to her, I do want this job more than anything. And I'm going to work here at some point. So we should just cut to the chase. And I was like, I think one of the things I could really help with is, for example, I just met Natalie Portman upstairs, and she mentioned that the bathrooms had paper towels on the floor because people were opening their doors and there was no trash can. And I was like, wow, I could start tomorrow, and I will, I'll make sure that none of our clients ever see paper towels on the floor in the bathroom. And she sort of paused and sat there and stared at me, and she had these like crystal blue eyes, like steely eyes, just staring at me. And she goes, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never heard a line like that. And she goes, we're going to find you a job here.
That's amazing.
And just like that, I got hired. And I couldn't, she was like, do you have a place to live? I was like, yep. Not true. I was hoping that my brother would let me stay on his couch. But whatever she said, I was like, yep. She's like, do you have a car? I was like, sure. Yeah, Dave Bolger will let me borrow his. And I went and met with an agent who had just returned from Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival that day. And I met with him, and he hired me on the spot. And I started there, and that was about 18 years ago, this past June.
Wow. Well, I imagine there's a huge part of the job, which is client service. And wrapped up in your rather smart line about Natalie Portman and the paper towels is an acknowledgement and a commitment to client service. So I have to imagine that's what resonated.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it's one of those, it's the mentality of like, nothing is not your job.
Right. Yeah.
It's what I look for when I'm hiring people now. Mm-hmm. It's the idea of, it's not my job, but I'm still going to do it because it's going to help someone else and it's going to get it done fast and doesn't, it's irrelevant whose job it is.
Yeah. If you had to describe what the job is, right? I think for a lot of people, the view of what the job is shaped by Jerry Maguire and Entourage, probably. And I'm sure there's far more to it, and it's not as exciting as that, or maybe it is. But what is the job?
The job is, it's like you said, it's client service, and you are dealing with, depending on whether you're dealing with writers, directors, actors, right? You're dealing with people who have entrusted in you really their hopes and their dreams, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone's handing you their script, that is, maybe their life's work that they're handing to you in, 70 to 120 pages and asking you to help make it into a movie or television show, right? So it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of really, it's reading with real reading comprehension too, because you help give notes, you help shape story. not that much, but sometimes clients will ask for your feedback or your opinion on things. Other times they just want to know whether you think it's good or not good. Mm-hmm. And then it's with actors, a lot of times it's either trying to procure the employment for them. So trying to track down a job that they either fit into, or maybe they don't fit into, but you convince someone that they can fit into it. So it's a lot of, you really have to have belief that, because sometimes people will go, no, that person just does this. And you're like, no, they're an actor. You've seen them do that well, but they do this, this, and this. You just haven't seen it yet. So let them come in and prove it to you. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part of it. And then negotiating all their deals. Mm-hmm. So we're basically, we're able to negotiate contracts without having a law degree, right? So you're negotiating the upfront fee, you're negotiating the back-end participation, you're negotiating their credit position, all the different things that go into what makes up a deal for an actor, actress, writer, or director.
How much of the job is having to tell people that's a bad idea, or trying to motivate them to do something you think is a good idea that they don't? You're clearly an advocate for people. I mean, it sounds like that's a big part of the job. But
yes,
does it also require an ounce of motivation or common sense, setting?
Sometimes it depends on the client, but not a lot. I guess part of the good news is by the time it's gotten to, this is going to sound arrogant, but it's not meant to be. But working at the level that I was lucky enough to be at CAA, the clients that I'm dealing with are at a certain level where it's gone through a couple different clearinghouses almost before it got to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's a couple fail safes that have happened. In order for it to even land on my desk, there's a pretty good shot that someone who is smarter than me has already said this is a good idea. Mm-hmm. So I haven't had to spend as much time being like, I think this is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. I have spent a lot of time saying, like, I don't think this is the right thing for you right now. Mm. I think we should do this rather than that. And then the hardest thing for me, I think, especially at the very beginning, is it's a lot of giving people, especially actors, it's a lot of giving people really bad news all the time. Oh. So, and I think where agents, similar to attorneys or anyone who's in a business like that, I think what happens is it's almost Pavlovian, where the person starts to associate that phone number calling in with, oh, here's bad news again, right? Mm-hmm. And you can sense that. So then you start to try and spin the bad news, and you try and make the bad news good news. And one of the greatest things that ever happened to me was Bradley Cooper had just done Wedding Crashers, right? He was not a household name by any means. And we were, he was going out and auditioning, and I would call him and I'd say, they loved you, but they want this. So they loved you, blah, blah. And he said to me, and it changed my life. It changed how I agent, changed everything. He said, he was like, Dave, you keep saying that they loved me, and then there's this but. That's not helping me. If they loved me, the next line really should be, they want you to either come back, you got a call back, or you got the job, right? So we got to dig deeper and find out what it is I'm not doing right in order to land some of these gigs. And I swear to you, it was like that. It's like the moment in the movie, it's the epiphany moment where I was like, oh my God. I'm like, yes, I don't have to sugarcoat this stuff. Now, some clients didn't necessarily agree with that strategy. And
I was just going to ask about that. I imagine that there's some delicate personalities that
yeah, there's some that require a different bedside manner, and some that just don't, I'm the wrong match for it, because I just found it so much easier to then be able to say, like, they didn't like you. They thought you looked weird. They didn't like they didn't like your attitude, or they didn't like your reading. They just thought you were the wrong guy for the role. And it changed everything. And just gave, it didn't change the fact that I still have to give bad news. It changed how I approached it, where I was like, listen, you signed up for the bad news business, right? Like 90% of the things are going to be no's. Let's just focus on what we can get a yes to and build from there. And once people kind of adapt to that sort of outlook on it, then it works really well. But it's a horrible business, because, it's so subjective, right? They've got a thing, whoever they're walking in that room already knows in their mind, they're picturing Christian Bale, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't come in and somehow outact Christian Bale in their minds, which is, impossible, then you're not the right person. And unless you go in and somehow change their mind, and they're like, oh, it's not Christian Bale, it's this person, right? So it's a really hard job that I do not envy that these people have signed up for.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, fighting through the 90% of no's, and hear you talk about your path, which was, I had to convince Hamilton to let me in. I had to convince my first job to hire me, and I was going to be persistent and keep calling. It seems like that, whatever that is that's inherent in you, to push through and beat the no or overcome it, is well suited for the job.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I never really thought about it like that. I think, again, it goes back to, I guess, a little bit of sports, and just sort of not, there's no team you can't beat if you put the right strategy in, the right players on the field, and the right, and you get the right bounces in your direction. I think just having that sort of mindset, is really helpful.
And it seems like, I'm not sure, but it seems like it worked out okay for Bradley Cooper.
Yes, it's going very well. Although I got to tell you, he is the hardest working dude. I mean, never takes anything for granted. He continuously, he'll say something, he'll get offered a movie, and he'll be like, do they want me to come read for it? And I'm like, no, Bradley, you've been nominated for however many Oscars. Like, you don't need to read for it anymore. He's like, I know, but if I read for it, maybe I can prove that I'm right for it. I'm like, no, they think you're right for it already. They're offering it to you. Like, he has the real blue collar working man's mentality, and it's never changed, not one bit.
That's great. All right, so you work your way in and use Natalie Portman's words to get yourself hired. Did you? So I'm curious. Have you seen her and dealt with her since then? And have you told her that story?
Everyone always asks that. So I'm friendly with her now. When I first saw her, I saw her at a party a bunch of years later. I was never invited to a party where she would be at until my clients were or something. But I eventually got invited to a party where she was. It was at my boss's house. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go tell her that she helps me get my job.
Yeah.
And so I go up to her and I tell her the story. And she was super sweet, but she was like, I don't remember saying that to you. And I was like, Natalie, I actually need you to remember this, because it's a pretty big part of my life. And we had a laugh about it, but at first she definitely did not recall it. But I do tell her whenever I see her that I thank her.
That's awesome. That's a great story. So help me understand how you went from this freshman down the hall borrowing my car to me seeing you on the cover of People magazine, marrying.
Oh God. Again, the Alyssa thing happened in the same that same cavernous lobby. She was in the building going to I think she was going to have lunch with her agent, and I was on my way out of the office to go to a lunch, and I passed by her in the lobby, and she stopped me dead in my tracks. And I was like, I almost tripped over my feet. It's cheesy, but I remember exactly. She's wearing a yellow dress. I remember, I can picture it right now. Long story long, I ended up probably a year and a half later covering a project that she was doing for TV. And that put me on the phone with her a number of times. And a friend of mine had actually dated her as well. So I knew her through that. And then at one point it just lined up that we were single at the same time. And she asked me out to dinner.
Huh.
That's right, Dave. She asked me. It's a true story.
I was hoping for, I got to tell you, I was hoping for another story of I asked her 15 times. She said no. I fought through the no.
No, because that is now, as I've learned, that's called stalking, and you're not allowed to do that.
That's right.
No, she asked me out to dinner, and I very happily said yes. And of course, I thought there was a pretty good shot that it was going to be, that she wanted to have me as an agent. But I was hoping that through our connection that maybe she didn't want me as an agent, and she was interested in going to more dinners. Mm-hmm. And now she's been stuck with me for God knows how long. and I'm making her chicken and potatoes right now.
Well, I imagine there were quite a lot of friends from home who were dumbstruck when that news started to break.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't think I realized just how many people's crush she was. Yeah. And of course I knew who she was, and I'd known the shows she'd been on, but I didn't grow up. I'd seen Who's the Boss, but I didn't grow up. That wasn't like, it's Tuesday night, we're watching Who's the Boss. Like that, that wasn't one of those shows for me. Yeah. But like, just the other day, my buddy forwarded me an article that said Chris Hemsworth, or Liam Hemsworth had just said that his crush growing up was Alyssa. And I said, I was like, we need to keep this from her, because this could push her over the edge. This one, she might just bolt. I can't compete against the Hemsworths.
She quite active, socially.
Is she? She is. I have to say, it is one of the things that I marvel at her ability to just get absolutely crushed from all sides.
Oh, it's
right? Because no matter what you say, no matter what you do, there are people coming for you. And she just, she turns the other cheek, and she just keeps fighting. She really believes. I mean, when we were first dating, I just remember her telling me stories of, like, she would go on these UNICEF humanitarian missions. And I was like, that sounds awful. Like, it sounds so hard on you as a human being, because she would go to, she was in Angola, and she was working with neglected tropical diseases that were affecting infants and stuff like that. And I'd be like, how do you do this? I mean, it has to wear on you. And she's like, what's the point? She started working when she was 8, I think 8 or 9. She got Annie. And I think her parents were just amazing role models, and said, if you're ever given a platform, or you're given a megaphone that someone will listen to, even if it's 2 people, then you yell through it. And she continues to yell, and she fights for everything and anything. And there's not, she gets called constantly. Will you help with this? Will you talk about this? Will you, do that. And she just says, yes, yes, yes. And it's I don't know how she does it, because I can't take it. I troll her trolls on Instagram because I was like, well, that's one thing I can do. Hamilton taught me to write really well. I'm gonna own this person right now.
I was gonna ask you if you're able to avoid the cesspool, or do you does human nature kick in and you want to read it? So you are checking out what some of these awful people are saying.
Sometimes I try really hard not to. She's amazing. She doesn't read it. Or if she does, like someone will say the most awful, vile thing to her, and she'll be like, I'm so sorry that you feel that way and that you're hurting inside, and I'm wishing you well. And I'm sorry we don't agree on this. And I'm like, really? That's what you're going to say to this person who just lit you up? And she's like, what am I going to do? She's like, me responding back is just going to like fuel their anger or their hate more.
Yeah.
She's like, they haven't done anything. She's like, that's just what they believe, and she's got a really good head on her shoulders about it. I don't, I get so, I feel bad. I don't like people talking like that about people.
Yeah. How the heck do you make time to be normal people and parents and all that with two, what I imagine are busy careers, and then all this social good that she's doing? I've seen press of her talking about your home life and being parents, and that's totally important to the two of you. I can't. Where do you find the
time? I think we both were lucky enough to have great parents of our own, and who taught us a lot. But I think you also have to learn a lot of this on your own and learn from your mistakes. But I think we made a very conscious decision when we first got pregnant with Milo. She said, I really want to take time and put my acting and stuff on hold. And I said, absolutely. And then luckily my job is, I'm able to do a lot of it remotely and from the phone and from emails and stuff like that. So I was able to go, I'd be able to be home for dinner and try and give semblance of a normal, home life. Yeah. But, it's like anything else. You can't just go like, this will work itself out. You actually have to really concentrate on it. And we sit down on Sundays and we schedule to go, okay, here's my week. I've got to do this. I've got to fly here. Well, now no one's flying anywhere, but I used to go on these things called airplanes and fly different places. And, we'd be really coordinated about it. And when she'd have to go away for something, I would either bring the kids or she would take the kids. You figure out ways to make it work. Or, she passed on a lot of stuff, a lot of things that I'm sure in her competitive mind, she would have loved to have done. A lot of TV shows, a lot of movies that she would have loved to have done, that she just had to politely say, I can't right now because I've got I'm raising a son and a daughter and trying to be a wife.
Well, we enjoyed her on Project Runway very much.
Oh, good. Good. That was a fun one. That's a perfect example. That shot in New York, she loved that job. And she made, she would forfeit money out of her check to say, I don't care about that. Put that money towards, an apartment where my kids can live. And her parents came with us. So we all lived in New York for 3 or 4 summers in a row, all together. And we had 2 apartments in Battery Park, and, the kids spent a couple months of the summer in New York. And it was awesome. But, the shoot days, she'd shoot, from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then she'd be home all day with the kids.
It's a crazy life. It's a crazy life you've weaved for yourself there, David.
It is. But we kind of just acted. we just decided at one point we were just going to act like this isn't crazy, right? Like you just pack your stuff up and you go where your family is, and this is what it is, right? And people have been doing it for a long time, and as long as we're together, that's where home is for that moment, right? So she shot a show she shot a show in Atlanta, and the kids went to preschool in Atlanta, and I flew in and out. I think I would fly in on, I'd land there on Thursday. I'd be there Thursday through Sunday night. And then Monday morning, I'd take a 6 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. And just, we did that, you make it work.
The one question I ask everybody is, thinking back on their time at the school, arriving, in your case, arriving to play soccer, had you known then what you know now with the hindsight of all your experience, would you have told that kid anything? Would you have done anything differently?
There's a couple things I think about. I absolutely loved my time at Hamilton. Loved it. Loved my friends. I loved everything about it. I loved all the sports I participated in. I have the best memories from there. Something I wish I had done that I just didn't realize. I don't know why I didn't realize, or maybe it just wasn't on our minds at the time. I wish we had taken more trips from the hill to somewhere, because there's so many things in and around the area. I feel like we were like home base there. And I remember thinking afterwards, luckily I get to travel a lot for my job. And I remember thinking like, wow, I'm in Boston and this actually isn't that far from, like, we could have done a weekend trip here, or I'm in Buffalo and we should have gone here. And like, it was just a bunch of different things that I wish we had done more excursions, because I think it would have been really fun, but also just, I think it's a great way to learn things, just to go experience it and be in different places and meet different people and talk to people who have different, views and perspectives than you. Because I do think you get a little bit insulated on the hill.
Yeah.
But I recently, just with I think it was right after the George Floyd murder, that I reached out to get in touch with my women's studies professor, Professor Adair, who's still there at Hamilton. And I remember so fondly. First of all, I remember like people giving me, the business about taking a women's studies class. I remember people being like, "What are you taking a women's studies class for?" And I remember so fondly the debates that we had in that class, and that Professor Adair in particular was so welcoming of other perspectives other than her own, what she was trying to teach. And she really embraced it, right? And by doing that, I think she changed a lot of minds, because you've got people from all different parts of the political spectrum at Hamilton, and obviously women's studies is a very liberal leaning class. And I just remember, her being so welcoming of different ideas and different perspectives, and then kind of really politely but thoughtfully going, okay, but then consider it this way, right? And then you just see someone go, oh my God, like I never even thought of that. And it's not their fault. It's the way they were brought up, and it's the way that their parents were, and it's probably the way that their grandparents were. And I thought that was so special and meant so much to me now, that I reached out to her just to tell her. And I have so many memories of moments where I had a professor who I took an art history class, and I remember the moment in the class, something just clicked in my mind that just changed how I studied. All of a sudden, like all of the tools that I had been sort of gathering and, using a little bit here and a little bit there, all of them kind of just melded. And I was like, oh no, I know how to do this now. And it just changed how I studied. It changed how I wrote papers. It changed everything. And it was from those are two examples of classes I otherwise probably wouldn't have taken, right? I was, I was a government major, so I was mainly in philosophy classes and stuff, and econ classes, that kind of thing. And art history and women's studies stood out to me as things that just totally changed my life.
I enjoyed that one. Lots of wisdom in there for current students and how to get their start. And if you're wondering where some of that competitiveness comes from, that Dave talks about a few times in the conversation, clearly that comes from a life in athletics, and his got started at an early age. We didn't talk about this in the interview, but I think it's important to note that Dave is the son of a legendary high school soccer coach, Miller Bugliari from Pingree. His dad is a National High School Sports Hall of Famer. He's the winningest coach in New Jersey history and the second winningest coach in the country. So I think when you're the son of a legendary coach like that, certainly there's some competitive juices that are going to flow. My thanks to Dave for a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Some fascinating stories, some funny stories. He's a funny guy. For a guy who likes to stay private, it was an honor to have him as a guest on this show. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM. Had I Known show on social media. hadiknown.buzzsprout.com for all previous episodes, including this one. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying all the music on this show. And as always, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week.